Welcome to Ask Isaac, your favorite online video advice column using the techniques of horary astrology to answer your most important questions. On this episode of Ask Isaac, we're going to answer 3 questions. The first question is, should I go to college? The second question is, should I run for Borough Council? And the third question is, will I ever have sex again? If you would like one of your questions answered on Ask Isaac, then send me an email at plantcunning@gmail.com with a sincere yes or no question, and I may use it on this show. How this works is, I get a question from somebody, and then at the time that I understand the question, I look at a chart of that moment, and I can tell from that chart, by delineating it and interpreting it, what the answer to that question is. And sometimes you can get very specific, precise answers. So let's get to it. Our first question from Schoolless in Chicago is, should I go to college? Now, when we're looking at this question, first we see that the ascendant is Virgo. So that means that Mercury, which rules Virgo, is the ruler of the ascendant and therefore the significator of the querent. Now, looking at Mercury, he's down here in the 4th house. So that's an angular house. That's good. He's in Capricorn. That's not necessarily great for him. And he's conjunct the sun. He's combust. He's about 6 degrees away from the sun. That's not great. Also, he's retrograde. So that right there, being combust and being retrograde and being peregrine, none of those are really good for Mercury. So we're going to then look at the 9th house ruler. This will signify higher education. So college. On the 9th house cusp, we have Taurus. So that means that Venus is the ruler of the 9th house. And where is Venus? Venus is down here in the 5th house. That's a good house. It's not a fantastic house, but it's definitely not a bad house. And she is in Aquarius. And Venus is not necessarily in a great position here. She's peregrine. She's not quite conjunct Saturn, but she's getting towards it. So she's not in a great position, not in a terrible, terrible position, though, either. So college isn't a bad thing. But we then look at any connections between Mercury and Venus. And here there's no applying aspects between Mercury and Venus. They don't see each other at all. So that shows to me that there's no connection between the querent, the person asking the question, and college. That means no, probably shouldn't go to college. You're probably not going to go to college. Also, Venus is not in any relationship with the moon. So the moon is a secondary significator for the querent. And the moon is here at 24 degrees Leo, and she is almost directly opposed to Saturn. And Saturn rules the 5th house. The house of pleasure, children, art, that's the house that Venus is in. So that would show some difficulties there in wanting to go to college because the moon is opposite Saturn, who rules Venus. Looking at Mercury, he's both retrograde and peregrine, so he's not in a great position in that way, though he is in the 4th house, which is a good house. But that house signifies home. So this person might be staying at home rather than going to college. And they wouldn't be a good fit for college. They're not necessarily going to be a great student because Mercury is debilitated. So he's combust, he's retrograde, and he's peregrine. So the querent is not necessarily cut out at this point for college. Okay, so let's get to our second question. This is from potential politician in Portland. Should I run for Borough Council? In this chart, we have Libra rising. So Venus is the significator of the querent. We have Venus down here in Capricorn, which she does not do super well in. And she is in the 4th house, which is a good house. It's an angular house, the house of the home, right? Like we saw in the last question. Now let's look at the office that she would be running for. That would be 10th house. It's career, government. So the 10th house is ruled by the moon because Cancer is on the 10th house cusp. So the moon is down here in the fifth house, and she's conjunct Saturn, almost loosely conjunct. She's about 8 degrees away. She'll be running into Saturn pretty quickly, but she's not super tight yet. She's also peregrine. She doesn't like being in Aquarius. And she is moving away from a trine with Mars. So let's talk about Mars now, because Mars signifies the querent's opponent, because Mars rules the seventh house cusp. Aries is on the seventh house cusp down here. So Mars is retrograde, and Mars is in the ninth house in peregrine. So he's not in a good position either. He's actually in a worse position than she is, because he's not in a angular house, and he's retrograde. But we have Jupiter here conjunct the seventh house cusp. So that's good for the opponent, because we have the greater benefic who's in his terms, in his nighttime triplicity. So he's actually pretty well dignified, essentially, and he's conjunct the descendant, just about 5 degrees off, but in the sixth house. So what this is saying to me is that she's actually not in a terrible position to win against her opponent, because her opponent's not in a great position. It does seem as though he's an incumbent, because the moon is separating from a trine to him. But there is also no connection between Venus and the moon. So we don't have any connection between the significator of the querent and the significator of the office that she would be running for. So I actually don't see her winning this, because there's no connection there. But she would be a better fit for this office than her opponent would be. So I would say go ahead and run, but there might be some other circumstances that don't allow you to run. I mean, looking down here at the moon, this job, being a borough council member, will probably restrict you in a number of ways that might have to do with children, because the moon and Saturn are in the fifth house, and the moon is conjunct Saturn. So the moon is running up against some limitations in the sign of children. So there might be some external things going on that would not let you actually get this office, though you probably do a good job. Okay, so let's go to the last question. And this is, will I ever have sex again? From Sexless in Seattle. So we have Gemini rising. So Mercury will be the ruler of the ascendant and the significator of our querent. So looking at Mercury is retrograde. That's not great. Looking backwards, he's peregrine. He's in Capricorn here in the ninth house. Though it looks like he's in his decan, so that's a very small amount of essential dignity there. He's conjunct Venus, and he's in the ninth house of travel and higher education and spirituality. But also looking at the ascendant, we have a nasty Mars parked there, retrograde, 9 degrees of Gemini, and the ascendant is at 5 degrees. So he's pretty close to the ascendant degree. To me, that shows definitely some problems, both with Mercury being retrograde and with Mars being retrograde. There's definitely some problems going on. But let's look at the fifth house, because the fifth house is sex, right? The fifth house is children and art and creative pursuits, and also sex and pleasure. These are all the things that are associated with the fifth house. So if we look at the fifth house, we see that Virgo is on the cusp. So that means that Mercury is also the ruler of the fifth house. That immediately shows to me that there is a connection between the ruler of the first house and the ruler of the fifth house, because it's the same ruler. So to me, that would say that just right away that yes, you will have sex again. However, because the ruler of the first and the fifth is retrograde, it might be a while. There'll be delays in that happening. Also, we have this terrible Mars right there, retrograde, on the ascendant. That to me might be saying that you've had some pretty difficult situations with men, It might mean you would go back to a previous lover. Yeah, that's what I'm kind of seeing here. Let's also look at the moon. So the moon is in Aries, 18 degrees Aries, in the 11th house of friends. Might mean that you meet somebody in a group of friends. And the moon is actually in a square, an applying square with Mercury. So to me, that again is giving me a yes. There's an applying aspect, but a yes with conditions, a yes with difficulties because it's a square. Okay, so that's my answer for this. Clearly, yes, you will have sex again, though it'll be after a delay and there'll be some difficulties you have to move through before that happens. Okay, so that's it for this episode of Ask Isaac. Please send me your questions if you have them at plantcunning@gmail.com. And okay, keep it cool. Cheerio. Bye.